Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jillian. I'm the program coordinator here at Poster House. If this is your first time here, Poster House is the first and only museum in the US dedicated to the art and history of the poster. And tonight we're thrilled to have Sara here to talk about her career with us and share some wonderful insights on her career being a designer. Before we get started, just a few notes. Restrooms are back by the 24th Street side on the left-hand side if you need those. And if you have any accessibility needs, we have earplugs, fidget tools, listening devices back at the info desk if you need any of those. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sara. Sara Hashim is an award-winning creative with 2 decades of experience in design, leadership, and education. She has a master's from Pratt Institute and was a fellow with Milton Glaser. She's worked with global brands like Nike, Google, Twitter, and Band-Aid to help them show up with a sense of purpose. Sara is currently an adjunct professor at NYU, where she teaches innovations in marketing, and she's the CEO of Forest and Trees, a consulting firm that supports leaders who recognize a mismatch between their organization's internal vision and its external expression. So without further ado, help me welcome Sara.
Thanks, everyone. It's so good to be here with you today. Hi, as Jillian mentioned, I'm Sara. And based on that bio, you might assume that the trajectory of my career would look something like this, kind of a steady upward climb. But that's not true. It doesn't. That's not true for even the greatest designers in the world. Nobody's trajectory looks like a steady upward climb, moving from one thing to another and one accomplishment to another. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. A career journey has lots of different factors associated with it. And when we don't talk about them, it sets us up for false expectations. What a career actually looks like, and it doesn't matter which industry you're in, your journey is going to look very different from somebody sitting right next to you. You're going to have lots of different things happening. You're going to have lots of accomplishments. You're going to get great titles. You're going to manage different projects. So lots of different kinds of things. But along with that are things that we don't talk about as much, right? When you look at the highlights and when you hear a bio, even like mine, there'll be lots of times where you're just putting in the work. You don't know exactly where it's going, but you know that it's going somewhere. And you have to develop the tools. You have to put in the skills that will get you where you need to go. Sometimes it'll be stressful. You'll be working, you'll be balancing your family, you'll be balancing all sorts of different things. You'll be stretching, you'll be growing. And sometimes there'll be uncertainty. There'll be times where things are just horizontal and you'll feel, okay, I'm putting in the work and is this okay? And yes, it is. Sometimes it's just in horizontal growth. So what I'd like to take you through today is some of the nuances of a career which you may not get in the highlight story. So let me start with the decision to become a designer. To take you back, I'd have to take you back quite a bit. This is taken a few days after I was born. And this is me, my mother, my grandmother, my uncle, and my father looking out at the camera. Now, this is not the story of how I decided to become a designer right as I was born. When I was 16, my father was diagnosed with renal cancer. And when treatment failed, about 2 years later, he died. And so a lot of things changed around that time. When I was 18, which is when he passed away, one of the things that I was told growing up, and I grew up in Pakistan in a traditional family background, but a liberal one, the common thing was if you wanted a career which was stable, you could become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. Those were good, stable fields to get a good pathway in life. Just to be clear, I did not have that pressure from my family, but a lot of my father's side of the family were doctors. And so I thought, sounds like a great idea. I could be a doctor. Now, when my father died, a lot of things changed. Things got really messy. They felt really uncertain. And one of the things that broke open in me was this idea that if something that I thought could never happen at 18, losing your parent, could happen, then maybe some of the other things that I'd always assumed as narratives about my life might also not be true. And not all of them were negatives, right? So I started thinking about that a little bit. Maybe I didn't have to be a doctor, maybe I could be something else. And more than a calling that was born of this really big moment, it was a question. And in fact, it was a lot of different questions, and they were quite scary at the time. Maybe. Give it one sec. And the questions were, okay, if you didn't want to be a doctor, what could you be? What would you choose to be? Where would you go? What would you do? And one day, feeling really distraught at the age of 18, I sat in my front porch and I started drawing. And I drew just whatever was in front of me. And what was in front of me was a boundary wall for the house and trees. And there were almond trees and mango trees and bushes. And I drew. It wasn't great, but it was something. As time went on, in the months after my father died, I held on to that badly drawn piece of something for dear life because it was the first opening I'd had in a really long time. And so I started thinking about what else I could be. And the truth was, I hadn't studied art. I didn't even know, or it didn't even occur to me that I could be an artist of any kind. But when I started looking things up, I thought perhaps I could be a graphic designer because in my 18-year-old head, a graphic designer was somebody who could earn a stable income and have a stable life. And I've grown up with this idea, which my family instilled in me really early on, that you can do whatever you want, but you have to be able to stand on your own two feet. So when I looked around at art schools in the area, I found one in Karachi, which is where I was from, and I somehow passed the entrance test and I started art school. I started art school in Karachi and it was so hard. It was so difficult. The people who were in art school were people who had been studying art for a really long time. And I had never studied art before, and they were much better at it. I had to put in so much time to do the things that came so easy to them. It was a really humbling experience. The things that would take them 2 hours to do would take me 6 hours to do. And before this, I was used to being top 3 in my class. And when you're learning to do something new for the first time, you are not top 3 at anything. So it was really sobering. In my first semester at art school, my GPA was barely above passing, but I persevered, I kept working hard, and when I finally graduated, I graduated with honors, but it was not a linear path in any way. So the lesson here was that courage is not the absence of fear. One of the things that I've learned time and time again is that when you leap, it doesn't mean that you're not scared. I was really scared. I didn't know where things were going to go. But I also knew that I wanted to change something. And this is one of the things that I keep reminding myself again and again, that when things are changing, when an opening appears, pay attention. And it can be really hard to pay attention when everything is in upheaval like it was in my life. But pay attention when something comes back. Because when that opening appeared, I was able to step up, I was able to show up and do the work. It taught me discipline and rigor that I carry in me really strongly still. And it was a beginning. Hard things sometimes teach you that. So fast forward a few years later, and I'll show you where I ended up. So I graduated from my undergraduate program, and I did a few different things after I graduated. I decided to teach a little bit. I became an art director at a multinational advertising agency called J. Walter Thompson. But my goal was really to go to grad school. So I applied to a lot of different schools, but the one I really wanted to go to was in New York. It was the Pratt Institute. When you're browsing catalogs to go to graduate school, you'll see these really beautiful images of lush green trees and lots of greenery. But if you happen to come to New York in the middle of winter, on one of the coldest winters on record, you'll find more of this, which is when I came, which is also a completely different talk. When I graduated from my master's degree, as I was graduating, I was an international student, which meant that I needed to find sponsorship. I needed to find somebody to sponsor my work visa so I could actually stay in the country. And while I was in school, we had the opportunity to work at Milton Glaser's studio. So you could apply to do that. I applied. I did not get this internship. Milton Glaser is one of the design legends that you study in design books when you're in school. And when I was graduating, right when I was graduating, I was offered 3 months at his studio. Now remember, this is 3 months that would cut into 1 year that I had to find a job and find sponsorship. But you don't say no when you get offered a fellowship at Milton Glaser Studio. So I said yes, very happily. Now, Milton Glaser is known for many different things. One of the things he's really known for is the I Love New York logo. And his method really focused on the connection between your hand and your mind and how that worked. And while I was there, it was incredible. We worked on lots of things like the Brooklyn Brewery packaging and the brand identity for Bread Alone. And it was a great experience. And once I got out of there, I did get hired by a design studio, and they did sponsor me for work. And I put in some of the most formative years of my life at that time. I learned how to build brand identity systems, which I did for the first time, and I decided I loved brand identity. I loved the idea of building a logo or a vessel for something which had parameters and guides around it, which would help a brand thrive out in the wild. Did lots of other things. That studio had a production arm, so I learned how to do video graphics. I worked with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which was working in health equity. I worked on lots of other projects for nonprofits around the city. We did some work on financial institutions, and then we did some work with real estate places, but a lot of brand identity work. For many years, I headed a campaign for Goldman Sachs, their CSR initiative called Community Teamworks, and I really enjoyed it. It was a program where people at Goldman Sachs would give back to the community once a year, and so I went and did the custom installs and t-shirt designs and all of these things. Things were going really well. I'd put in 5 or 6 years at this studio, and I became design director there, and it felt like a really big accomplishment. And then one day, I was told that there had been a financial issue at the agency, and so lots of people were being let go. And everybody at design director level was let go. Poof, all gone. Now, I knew that being let go was not about my performance. I'd actually been clearly told this, and I had been given relative kindness in the process of being let go. And in fact, one of the founders of the studio was really invested in my growth, and she really cared about me, and I could tell. But despite all that, lots of feelings came up as I was laid off. Feelings like deep shame at maybe having not done a good job, anger at honestly not having been the one to have left first, frustration at the lack of control, and a lot of overwhelm at what do you do next? Like, what do you do after that? Lots of other feelings like confusion and sadness. But I noticed once I acknowledged those feelings and kind of let them move through me, I noticed a shift through time. When I was thinking about what to do next, I had been interviewing for my next full-time position. And what I would have done was I would have jumped into the next full-time role because it would have been the next logical step. But because I was laid off, I had a little bit of severance and then there was unemployment coming in. And so it gave me just a beat to take before I took the next logical step to make sure, was it the right one for me? There were ideas of leadership that I was carrying in me. Leadership, at least in New York at that time, and even today, seems to carry a really strong narrative about how you carry yourself, what you do, how you exist in the world. And at least at that time, there was this strong narrative about it being decisive, about it being loud, about maybe even a little unkind in order to tough love people to get them to do all the right kinds of work. I didn't fall into that narrative. I felt like if I didn't fall into that narrative and I believed in using your values and rising together and being a great leader and having a high bar, does that mean that I can't be a good leader? So I had all these questions that were coming up. The idea of flexibility. I'd always had a routine enforced on me. I had a routine in school. I had a routine at work. I love routines. But once I was out in the world without them, what would I choose to do? And then the right way. This one comes back for me a lot. Conventional wisdom says, at least in design circles, if you want to build a freelance practice, you should build a practice on the side while you have a full-time job, and then you should jump once you have that practice. So you have a safety net. I got laid off. I didn't have any of that. So I was curious about whether I would actually be able to thrive in that situation. The financials. I knew how much I needed to make a month in order to survive in New York, but I wasn't freelancing at the time. I was wondering whether I would actually be able to do that. And then community already meant a lot to me. And when you're at work, you have a community at work. And so building a community when you don't have that, and when you step outside of the confines of the thing you were in, I was curious, what would that feel like? For me, the lesson was liberation through the loss of control and stability. Liberation because I was stepping out in a world where the rules that had governed my world no longer existed. And so I was wondering what would happen. And when you lose stability and control in the way that I had in this situation, a lot of the time, and I bet many of you can empathize with this, you feel really scared. Your ideas go towards a fear-focused future, right? What's going to happen? I'm never going to make it. All of those things came up for me as well. But I would invite you to shift that just a little bit to see what reality is as experienced, not as we fear. And a lot of the time, it's a little bigger than we think. So I decided that I would have this beat to start consulting and I would see how it goes. And I gave myself 1 year to freelance or consult. I said, I'll give it 1 year and I won't have expectations or judgment around it, apart from the fact that I needed to make what I needed to make to live in New York. And that was it. In February of 2015, I walked into a bar. I was dating the man who would become my husband many years later, and he took me to this bar because there was a jazz band playing there. It was a trio, and it was led by this woman named Kate. Kate's voice was phenomenal. We were both blown away. And my husband at the time, my partner at the time, was in film. And so I said to him, you should see if she wants her next performance filmed. And he said he would, but he's a little bit shy, so he didn't. And the moment passed us by. We said, it's fine. We'll go to her next performance and we'll ask her. And the time when she was performing next, one of us got sick and we thought, okay, it's one of those moments that's just passed you by. A few months later, we were walking around Queens and we went to this place called the Queens Kickshaw. It was a place where we were going to go to eat. And we sat down and we opened up our menus and we looked up and the waitress was Kate. Such happenstance, such a New York moment. And this time we jumped into it and we told her how much we loved her voice. And he talked to her about filming her next performance. And she said, that would be great. And as part of that conversation, she asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm a graphic designer. I'm building my own freelance practice. And I said almost half jokingly, are you looking for a logo? And she said, yes. And I ended up doing a logo and a website for her. And I think it was $700 at the time, which was a lot of money for her and not enough money to live on for me, but it was something. And at that point, I was ready for something. I worked with Kate for many years, and her fabulous talent was on summer stage this year at Lincoln Center. And the thing that I want to stress in this story is I didn't know her from before. I didn't have an in the music business. It was just a conversation that led to something else. Sometimes life is like that. From working with Kate, hold on, bear with me. I worked with Kate for quite a while, and we did her brand and identity, and her parents owned a lavender farm upstate. And she introduced me to them, and I did the brand and identity for their lavender farm. We did packaging. We did a few different things, their website, and just to give them the creative scaffolding to really give their business a way to thrive. And I love a good story that comes around. When my husband and I got married a few years ago, Kate's fabulous voice ushered us into a new chapter in our lives, and Lavender Farms lavender adorned our wedding space. I did so many different kinds of projects during that time. I worked on a brand called Canticos, which was a children's brand, which has since become quite a big deal. And through it, the founder introduced me to the CEO of a purpose-led agency. And we started working together, and I started consulting with him regularly. And one of the first projects that I did was a logo for a brand called Assemblage, which was a co-working space which talked about gathering under a common value system. We worked on Heelys together, and I loved being on set. I still do. And I spoke at Creative Mornings, which is a community of people with an engine of generosity at its center. And after that talk, I joined a women's business owners salon. And through it, I met the woman who would be my business partner many years later. I did the brand identity for a Vietnamese coffee brand. I worked on a jewelry brand where they were changing the way they would show up for their consumer. And it was a lot of different kinds of projects, which is not unusual if you're starting your business at that point in your career. But one of the things that came back to me was a shifting sense of awareness as more and more work started happening. I started to see patterns showing up, and I was paying attention to them as they did. I realized I loved value-driven communities. I really wanted to be part of communities where people cared about how we rise together. And I'll forever be grateful for Tina Roth Eisenberg's Creative Mornings community, which gave me so much sustenance in those early days. I don't know about you, but I hate traditional forms of networking. It's very tough for me. But I do love talking about my work. I love talking to people. And I realized that if I did that reframe, instead of thinking about it as networking, it was actually a great way to meet people and find work as well. I realized I loved building brand systems. I loved thinking about strategy and design at its center. And I loved purpose-led systems particularly. And turns out I thrived in leadership positions. I was doing them in all sorts of different places in all sorts of different ways. I built the right support systems. And through them, I gained visibility and I started speaking more, and that led right back to community. The lesson for me here was to follow and pull on that thread, to allow all the work to happen, but to have a sense of awareness as it was happening. I feel like so much of the time, the breadcrumbs in our story are right there, but we're not often able to step away to view them with perspective. But viewing them with some perspective is often the only way that we're going to find out what the next right step is for us. Let me take you into a moment when I started teaching. When I first started teaching, my first couple of attempts, not very good. I was very young and very inexperienced. When I was in my undergraduate program, I was the one who would gather everybody who took art history classes and give them a recap at the end of the semester because everyone was falling asleep during art history classes during the semester, but you had to pass art history in order to move to the next year. So we would frantically gather, I would teach people, they would give their exams and hopefully get through. The next time I tried teaching was right after my undergraduate. I decided that I wanted to try subbing for an art teacher. And it was fine. I did my best, but my method of teaching at that point was more mimicry than anything else. The second time I tried teaching was right after I started consulting. I was offered a position at Hofstra University where I was offered a design curriculum, and I almost didn't get it. I interviewed for the position, but I was so nervous and I wanted to be so buttoned up, and I was focusing so much more on the candidate I thought they wanted me to be, and they passed and they went to another candidate. But the next semester came around and they remembered me. And this time I learned my lesson and I really leaned into making sure that I was leading with excitement, and I got it. And I loved teaching design. It was really, really interesting. One of the other things it was at Hofstra University, which meant that I had an hour-and-a-half commute each way twice a week, which is quite a lot to do. But I still enjoyed the teaching a lot. I learned a lot. I learned that I wanted to pull things in from everywhere, and it was an enjoyable experience. Which brings us to attempt number 3. I was ready for a challenge, and I was ready for something new, hopefully something closer to home. But before I got closer to home, I got much further away. I went for a wedding of a really close friend to Rochester, New York. And it was in the middle of winter, which is making me realize that a lot of things are happening for me in the middle of winter in New York, which is ironic because I hate the cold. But anyway, I was I was at this wedding, and I was talking to the bride's cousin, who was a professor at NYU, and I told her I really wanted to teach. And she said, I think there's an opening in my department. Why don't I put you in touch with someone? And that's what she did. Now, when I spoke to the people in the department, they didn't have a design course available. They had an innovations and marketing course available. And I had been teaching, I had been absorbing brand, marketing, design, all of that through the work I was doing. But the minute somebody said, do you want to teach an innovations and marketing course? It activated all my imposter syndrome. But I also knew that if I didn't move from where I was and I didn't push myself to do new things, I wouldn't learn anything. And so I learned my lesson from the other two experiences, and I really leaned into my excitement. I pitched the course like from the ground up with the experience I brought to it, my design, my brand strategy, connecting the dots in all sorts of different ways. I remembered to lean into the excitement and not try to be so buttoned up and be somebody else's candidate. And they said yes. So, what did I bring to this experience that would really activate this course for me and was based on things that I knew about myself? The first thing was I'd been working in the design field for many years, so I actually had a lot of concrete information at this point, and it was really helpful to remind myself of that. I'd absorbed a lot of marketing strategy and I wanted to build a robust curriculum, but I also wanted to build one which gave me a lot of confidence. I knew that I loved to tell a story. I love to tell a strategic story. So if you put me in a deck, I love to create the deck and the arc of a story, but also I love to share stories with people. And I thought that would be useful as I was building this. I love connecting with people. It really invigorated me. So I thought the environment of teaching would likely suit me. I also loved connecting ideas. And this is something that clients in my consulting practice would call out when they worked with me. They were like, you really are able to connect ideas from lots of disparate places. And then I consider teaching a high calling. I feel like it's a huge gesture of trust. When you teach somebody, you have the ability to change them in all sorts of different ways. And so it felt like a really big deal. And I wanted to make sure I was doing it well. I also wanted teaching to be informed by what I was doing in my work life. So that mix was really important to me. So the result is a course that is a deep reflection of who I am. As a working professional, as a person, we have a marketing strategy curriculum that's the foundation of everything that we work on. We have discussions, we have assignments where everybody is engaged and they're really thinking about what we're doing. We pull in insights from all over the place. We analyze trends reports. And I still do takeaways for every single class so I can learn and see what can be changed, what's gaining traction, what is doing really well. I consider my identity a multifaceted one and a complex one. I love reading. I love reading nonfiction. I love reading fiction. I love reading about artist stories. I love reading about non-artist stories. I love reading about the way work is done and how we exist in the world. And instead of thinking of these as completely different plot points that have nothing to do with each other, I choose to absorb them and let them inform everything that I'm doing. And so my suggestion would be to remind yourself that you are an expansive human being with lots of different things that you care about, and to really activate that. The key for me is authenticity over conformity, particularly in this situation. It would have been so easy to either have so much self-doubt when I was teaching something new to not apply for it, or to try and do it like anybody else had done it before me. But in activating the things that I had in me, it made for a much stronger course. I've been teaching this course for about 9 years now, and my students are engaged. They're really excited. They're waitlist for the course. They talk to each other about it. They recommend it to each other, which is so sweet. They keep in touch with me years after they're gone, and it makes me a much better leader. It makes me a better leader. It makes my work better. I connect ideas differently. And it really reminds me of something I feel very strongly about. In my work life, we work with leaders to nurture them and to make sure that they have the right support systems to build organizations that reflect the kind of world we want to live in. And when I'm teaching, I'm thinking about nurturing the leaders of tomorrow. It's very much a top-down, bottom-up idea, because both of those things really matter. As I was working in consulting, I was working with a purpose led advertising agency that I was telling you about. And it was great. We had a lot of trust. I would come in and out of projects. I knew the CEO very well, I knew the team very well. And just before the pandemic hit, the CEO called me and asked me a question. He said, "We have a really big project. Would you consider coming on a full time basis to help us take our next leap?" And this was really appealing to me because I was ready to take my own next step as well. And I was curious about what it would feel like to be part of a core leadership team in a space like this. But I also knew that I didn't want to be just part of the creative team. I knew that in order to affect systems and culture, I wanted a role that would span across the agency. And so I asked him if I could be in a role that would span across creative and accounts and strategy. And he said yes. And so I started my leadership role in the space. The work that we did at that agency was some of the most impactful work of my career. It was a talented team. We were doing work that really mattered. It was a mission we really believed in. Some of the projects we brought to life were Band-Aid's first multi-tone Band-Aid. And beyond the beautiful packaging and the campaign and the production, which was all really well done, was this idea that you could bring an everyday product to market that would represent people of color, and that an everyday product could make people feel seen. When we shot our first campaign, it was in the middle of COVID. We were pre-first vaccinations coming out, and so we had to shoot in a situation where we were testing every day, there was social distancing, there were protocols around how you could work with models and with costs. And it's wild when I think of what we pulled off in terms of the time that we were in and what we were trying to achieve. We worked with Twitter on their Twitter Voices initiative, which was a brand identity system, which was aiming at elevating marginalized voices across the Twitter community. This was before Twitter became X. We worked with HP on their Path initiative, which was about bringing digital equity to people all across the world. We had a project that was at South by Southwest. We worked with Nike on their Black Community Commitment Initiative, which was about really empowering people in lots of different spaces, with people of color, in education spaces, with social justice involved, just across national and international spaces. And I was gaining much more visibility, both inside the organization and outside of it. And so I was really starting to just show up much more. Along with all the great work we were doing and all of the visibility, this situation was not without its complexity. We were doing a lot of great work, and we were getting a lot of really wonderful opportunities because purpose-led agencies, particularly purpose-led agencies of color, were getting a lot of traction at that time. So there was a lot of work to be done, but we had to build all these systems as we were doing it, and we were an agency that was scaling very fast in order to do that. It felt really high stakes. We were an agency of color that was purpose-led, and it felt like we had to work 3 times as hard to be in places where general market agencies were. And the work felt like it was so important because it needed to be done. So we couldn't afford to fail, and we had to do even better than everybody else. I was wearing lots of different hats because of the role that I really wanted to be in. So I was pitching, I was in client meetings, I was leading the account team, I was helping with creative, I was doing lots of stuff. And the team was really, really talented, but we were moving at breakneck speed all the time. And so, of course, there was miscommunication, there were ruffled feathers, there was all the stuff that happens when you're building a system really quickly. We were all working really hard. Everybody was putting in regular 12 to 14-hour days, which brings me to the cost. After a few years of working in this way at this speed, I noticed something that couldn't be ignored. I was really tired, but we were all really tired. And look at what we'd achieved. It seemed like such a big deal. But I started getting migraines that were chipping away at my days. And when I started to ignore them, they got even worse, to the point where I was getting migraines every 2 or 3 days. It was becoming impossible to do work at all. And I was getting really scared. I went to neurologists, I went to doctors, I got MRIs done. I started medication, and nothing I did would stop it. And so, after putting together a bunch of solutions, I realized that the cost of this job was starting to become really, really high. We tried a few different things so I could stay, but at the end, I had to leave. And I want to really stress the nuance of a situation like that, where I loved the team, I believed in the purpose, and I still had to step away. And the lesson for me was I had to take the time to do the math, and not just the obvious math, which is how much money are you making every month? I was in a well paying job. I was in the most senior leadership position I had ever been in, and I had job stability. But my body was very literally breaking down. And so I had to think about the equation and whether it made sense or not. And a lot of this was my own narrative around what it felt for me at the time. When I stepped away from this, it felt like I had failed. It felt like it was a personal failing that I had not been able to somehow take hold of my body and move through a really tough problem. And it also felt like I was letting my team down. I felt like I was prioritizing my health over their success. But that isn't the right math either. And it's such hard judgment that I see now, but it was really difficult to see at that time. And after I left, not that long after, my health improved, and I saw a return to myself that I hadn't felt in a really long time. Which brings us to where I am now, starting Forest and Trees. Forest and Trees is an accumulation of a lifetime of lessons, but particularly the ones that we just went through. Sam and I started Forest and Trees, but before we started that, let me tell you the story of how we met. When I was at Creative Mornings and I gave that speech, I joined a business owners collective, and as part of that collective, we went on a retreat. And the organizers realized that we got along really well, and they put us in a room together for the weekend. And I learned a few different things that weekend that were really important. First of all, as I mentioned, I feel very cold in every situation. And in the middle of the night, Sam woke up and she covered me with an extra blanket. That is the kind of person that Sam is. If you need an extra blanket, she will cover you. If you need a proposal template, she will get that to you. If you need a nudge into your next future, she will give that to you too. And unrelated, I realized as I was halfway up this fire tower that I was suddenly scared of heights. And so I had to come down really fast. And so I learned a lot of life lessons that weekend. When Sam left her job at Netflix and I left the role that I was just talking about, we knew that we wanted to work together pretty quickly, but we didn't know the vessel. We didn't know what it was we wanted to do. So we started by experimenting in a lot of different ways. We started by building our individual work, and helping each other and supporting each other. The other thing we did was we got together a few other people who had also left their jobs around the same time, and we formed a collective, and we supported each other, and we helped each other build anything we needed to at the time. And this transitioned really quickly into a set of retreats that helped people move through career transitions using that process. We then ended up doing a series of not networking gatherings, which were a series of gatherings where people could just get together, not have the pressure of networking, and just meet each other and have a conversation. We noticed both before we met and as we met that a few patterns were coming up. We both really enjoyed working with individuals, with people, with organizations as they were moving through change. There was something really powerful about thinking about change, informing it, clarifying it, and supporting it in order to make it into something a little bit different. So we noticed that pattern. Forest and Trees is something that Sam and I created together. It's a creative consultancy that works with leaders in organizations that recognize that there's a misalignment between how they're operating on the inside, their organizational strategy, and how they're showing up on the outside, their brand. One of the first pieces we worked on was our joint values. We worked on this with a strategist almost straight off. We also worked on a business plan and all sorts of other things. But this was really important. It was the way that we were going to show up and how we were going to work with the people we were going to work with. It was a compass that would drive every engagement we had. And our values included things like community and how we felt about it, creating supportive care, intentional space, the idea of curiosity, And the idea of plentitude, that there is more than enough for everyone. You have more capabilities than you think are possible, and you're probably capable of doing more things together than you are alone. We also worked on a set of partnership principles. This was really important because we wanted to build intentional work with people who understood where we were coming from so we could do great work with them. A lot of the time, when people are building businesses, this part of it gets put to the side as you're trying to get as many clients as possible as quickly as possible. But for us, this piece was really important, and we put it front and center on our website. And it ensured that when people came to us, they understood who we were and the rules of engagement were clear so we could solve the right kinds of problems for them. Sam and I met many years ago, but we did not jump into working together immediately. So by the time we started working together, we had a good idea of our story. We understood our skills. We understood what we were good at. Sam stepped into a COO role, and I stepped into a CEO role at Forest and Trees, which was a perfect balance of our skills and desires. This year has been really interesting, but again, it's not been without its complexity, and those nuances are really important to acknowledge and talk about. We got a lot of visibility. We joined many networks. We went to lots of conferences. We've given talks. We've written thought leadership pieces. We've published in magazines. We've found new community, and we've refound old community as well. We want to work with purpose-led organizations and nonprofits, and this is an industry we deeply believe in. We're building a company intentionally. It matters, and we're thinking about it every step of the way. And it's been a really challenging year. Nonprofit funding has been cut in so many ways, and even outside of the nonprofit world, we're finding industries are frozen in place as you think of starting to work. We've had some health scares that we needed to work out. We needed to rest and take some time off. And we prioritized work-life balance. We both had things outside of work that we wanted to focus on, and we made sure we made time for them, even in difficult years. Forest and Trees is a culmination of so many lessons in building resilience, navigating uncertainty, and creating meaningful work. The 5 that I showed you applied to us directly. We had to have courage, even though we were scared. There were lots of unknowns, and we have to be brave. There is a liberation through loss of control and uncertainty for us. We left intentionally very traditional, stable backgrounds in order to come here and to build this thing. And it's been one of the greatest joys of my life to be able to do that, and to be able to do that with somebody who I deeply respect and trust. We have to follow and pull on that thread. We do this with our business. We do this with the people that we work with. So we have to do it internally and externally. And we had to embrace authenticity over conformity. When people hear about us, they say, "Are you a design studio?" We're not. We're not a traditional design studio. We're not a traditional organizational strategy firm. We fall in the spaces in between, and we revel in that difference. And we took the time to do the math. Even though it is so challenging building a business, even though it's a year with so much uncertainty, the equation still makes sense to us. And we check in on that with each other. We check in individually to make sure that's still the case. I want to come back to something I started off with, which is a journey is a culmination of so many different kinds of things. And there's uncertainty, there is resilience that you build through it. It's kind of a nuanced journey. We live in a world that prioritizes quick takeaways and hustle culture and speed at the expense of everything else. And it prides itself on linearity. It would be so much easier to say that a career journey was going from one thing to the other. But that's not actually the full story. And I would say it's dangerous to propagate a story that amplifies linearity and reduction over the nuances of an actual story. An actual story has uncertainty, it has challenges, it has lots of milestones that you reach, but is a true reflection of a well-lived life. And that's a story that it's worth looking back on. And it doesn't matter where you are in your career, whether you are in the beginning, the middle, or the end, there is real value in that reflection. As I was putting together this talk, I thought about that for myself, and it was really impactful for me to think about the threads that had tied my work together, but also to see that it wasn't as clear as it is now. And so I invite you to think about your own messy and glorious journey so you can create your own intentional path towards a meaningful future. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to the Poster House. I think we're going to open it up to questions if anyone has any.
Hi. When you approach a new space that's highly ambiguous, can you just talk a little bit about your process, how you start to clarify and align stakeholders across discipline, and just start with the direction forward, even if you don't know if it's right?
It's a great question. With forest and trees, we actually have a process for it. And it's something that we've kind of learned over time working with different people. We call it a catalyst. And the reason we want to start with that process is because a lot of the time people think they're solving one problem, but they're actually solving another. And so what we do is we come in, we do an audit, we'll do stakeholder interviews, and we'll make sure that we're solving the right problem and create a plan around it. And so the work is in that discovery and making sure that you're doing that. And that's a good way to start in work. Was it a work question or was it in other spaces as well? That's how we do it when we're working. There was a question here.
Hello.
Hi.
So I would love to know, like, outside of the work that you do, just as a human, what are some of the strategies you employ to navigate complexity?
Oh, such a good question. I always find it funny that uncertainty is something which I know as a human being, like we keep coming back to, and the messy middle is something that we have to come back to again and again. But I hate uncertainty. It makes me so uncomfortable. But I also know that it's the only way to get to growth. And so I feel like because I know that, I try and take a step, like take a pause before something feels really chaotic. And even if it's feeling chaotic, take a step, think about what's happening, and try and quantify that in some ways. And taking that beat in the middle makes a really big difference when I'm trying to strategize either personal problems or work-related problems. Does that help?
Thank you so much for sharing, Professor Hashim. When you're starting out in different places, could you share what it was like advocating for yourself, and any advice for anyone's trying to start their career or transitioning into spaces that they're not familiar with?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's so nice to see you. I think advocating for yourself is something you learn over time. And it's almost, I feel like it's something you develop the more you do it. And so trying to get a good sense of who you are, and sometimes that's hard to do when you're, thinking about yourself, but finding people who you trust, who are able to tell you some of that as well and reflect that back to you. Having a mentor, somebody you can trust who's a little further ahead in your career as well. And then getting comfortable putting that into language and saying out loud. I feel like the more you get comfortable saying it out loud, the more you will be able to advocate for yourself. And that takes practice. And I feel like in some situations, I'm still learning that lesson again and again. So it's not a once learned kind of thing.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
I had a two-pronged question. One is, how have you dealt with imposter syndrome over the years? And secondly, kind of related to that, how do you overcome sort of the self-doubt and keep that in perspective?
Yeah, that's such a great question. With imposter syndrome, I found a couple of things that really help. The fear is the first thing that happens, and I think being able to acknowledge it and just say, okay, this is what's happening, and almost to remind yourself that this is the thing that happens to me when I'm in this situation. And when you can remind yourself of that, you can remember that it's not something that is internal in you. It's kind of just a thing that's happening on repeat. So that's one thing. The other thing that's really helped me is leaning into the curiosity of what's going on. Because when I'm leaning into what's going on and trying to figure it out, I'm stepping away from all the things in my head that are telling me that I'm not good enough to do it, which is the thing that comes up when you have imposter syndrome. And then the last thing I'll say is I feel like imposter syndrome is one of those thorny problems where the more you interact with it, the more you're able to break it down into things. And so when you break it down, that situation, whatever that unique situation is, you'll see it's not just one thing. It's likely 5 things that are manageable on their own, but that one big overwhelming thing feels really scary. And so that interaction for me has really changed things. So I have to remind myself to do it even when I want to push away. I think right.
I really enjoyed your talk. It was really great. It's actually my first time at this sort of seminar kind of thing.
Oh,
But
welcome.
my question for you is, I'm a second year student. What advice or habits do you think that someone who's starting out in the career, where I'm basically barely starting, but what are some things that you think I should keep in mind to prepare for like the future, for when I want to go to an agency or some sort of organization?
Yeah. I think there are a few things that I try and talk to students about because, first of all, I feel like entering work life right now versus 15 years ago feels really different. And it can feel really overwhelming. And it certainly feels that way for a lot of people. But it can also be really exciting. Instead of trying to keep up with the latest thing that's happening, because change is happening all the time, I would focus on the core skills that you need that will serve you in lots of different situations. And that's what I work on with my students as well. So instead of saying, okay, how do we master this version of AI? Or how do we make sure that we're using this technology in the right way? We're thinking about what are we trying to achieve with that? And bringing it down to those core questions will actually help you in lots of different situations. The other thing I'd say is, building discipline to learn something, even when it's hard, is difficult. But applying yourself to something which takes a little bit of time and giving yourself the time to learn, be bad at it for a little bit, and then get better at it over time is grace that if you give yourself and if you set yourself up for that expectation, changes the way you interact with something. Otherwise, it just feels like it's hard, I don't like it, I don't want to do it. And I understand that too. I felt that way.
Thank you, Sara, for sharing yourself with us. I noticed that in your trajectory, even though you had your downs, the downs never really came down. You never let the downs really came even below where you started, right? So it seems to me that overall, and I don't know if I'm right, but it seems like the big picture, you always saw it as going up because you were actually continuously learning. I don't know, is that, I don't know.
No, absolutely. I think that's exactly how I felt. I feel like a lot of the time, those ups and downs are subjective. Somebody else drawing it, even with the same milestones, might have drawn those lower sections much lower. And that is a reflection of a lived experience. I do think that most of the time, the trajectory does end up going up. And thinking about it in that way helps you weather through those times where it feels like it's just going down. So I think that's conscious and unconscious at the same time. Thanks for noticing that.
Any more questions?
You mentioned AI in response to another question, and I'm just curious how you are or not, or deciding when to incorporate AI in your own workflow or work you deliver to clients?
Yeah, I mean that's the conversation of the day these days. It's really true. I think we think about AI in a few different ways. I'll talk about it with students and then I'll talk about it with work. When we're talking about it with students, I try not to say it's good or bad. I don't like the black and white of that because I think that it can be many different things. We try and delay using AI or generative AI for use in class unless we're using it for a very specific purpose. So we make sure that there's a safe space to play, but we're not using it as a shortcut to thinking. And that's really, really important. So that's the way we use it in class. And we do a lot of readings around the ethics of AI. We do readings around the potential. And so again, it's to give them that nuance so that when they enter the workplace, they're not thinking about it just one way. They're going to be using it. So that's a given in this world. When we think about it from a work perspective, we're also thinking about it similarly in that it's not that we wouldn't use it in certain situations, but we don't use it as a shortcut to thinking. I think we're hearing a lot, particularly in the fields in which we're operating in, that people are using it as a shortcut to do something faster. And my feeling on that is that it results in everything looking the same. And we're going to see that everywhere. You're going to start seeing, you see the same language. There are lots of articles about how you can tell if something's been written by AI. And so on the surface, it's helping you make this big jump. But if you go into what's actually happening, a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, it kind of has, it's not that it does everything really well. You have to be really careful. So we use a lot of restraint, and we talk about it a lot when we're using it to make sure that we're not using it by default. It's never a by default solution. And I think that's the way to use it, now or later.
All right. I think we're going to end it there. Thank you, Sara, for your incredible insight. Give it up one more time. Thank you so much.
Please thank this incredible team for having me. They have been so generous with their space and their time, and it's just been really lovely being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. The museum is open for a little while longer till